Okay, so this is an overview of my work so far and a look at upcoming work and present things on projects. Pre-perinatal psychology overview. This is from the book Wounded Deer and Centaurs, The Necessary Hero in the Prenatal Matrix of Human Events.
Yeah.
And this heading is Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology Overview, Later Theorists, the author. Subheading, Michael Adzema, Primal Therapy, Spirituality, Primal Process and Spiritual Process, Soul, Proof of, quotes, God. Subheading, A Primal Perspective on Spirituality. As a theorist and pioneer in this field as well, I need to give an overview of my work. Having completed primal therapy in Denver, I presented the cumulative project for the BA in 1978 that I had years previously left behind in 1972. In my bachelor's thesis, I sought to discover whether spirituality and God were real or were results of primal pain, as Arthur Janov contended. While approaching the project from Janov's perspective and not entertaining spiritual interpretations in the least, I was shocked to both begin experiencing spiritual experiences in my primaling, which could not have roots in my primal pain, and to come across other primalers who are having spiritual transpersonal experiences in their inner work as well. Heading, Validity of some spiritual/transpersonal experiences. Furthermore, research into the literature and findings of this new field and into corresponding spiritual literature led me to discover not only that such spiritual experiences were being encountered in deep experiential therapy, Grof's work was significant here, but also that some primal experiences were remarkably like experiences that have been described as being encountered on their spiritual path by enlightened souls, both currently and in previous times. Guru Swami Muktananda's autobiography was significant in this respect. Also, I found that scientific measurements of brainwave and other aspects of brain function coincided at advanced levels of both the primal and spiritual processes. Both kinds of practitioners, primalers and meditators, had extraordinarily easy access to their theta and delta wave patterns, for example. Lastly, I was able to show that the terminology, with at the most slight adjustments in the perspective, in both spiritual and primal processes, corresponded in nearly every case. Heading, Proof of Soul. God? Question mark. In the article that resulted from this project and was published 6 years later in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, I broke from Janov in asserting a valid spirituality and the possible existence of a God or spirit beyond our physical confines. As I put it in words remarkably like pier bolts, as quoted from Falls from Grace, where this article ended up being published as Section 2, Chapters 6 through 18 of that book of mine, quote, Proof of God, in quotes. Some of these experiences, especially in the parapsychological realm, such as ESP, clairvoyance, and ancestral memories, have even found verification with an astonishing degree of accuracy in Grof's follow-up research. Even the primal perspective, which points to the existence of memory and consciousness at the fetal, single cell, and sperm and egg level, certainly would have to acknowledge such awareness to have more subtle underpinnings in the brain and spinal cord. All this points to the existence of something that is subtler than the physical body and undergirds the entire length of one's physical life. The evidence also seems to suggest that this subtler self permeates much of matter and life in realms outside of the personal domain, and therefore can be accurately termed transpersonal. End quote. Subsequently, primalers had the support they needed to go into the early prenatal, the cellular, and the transpersonal regions that their primal process was taking them, but which in Janov's limited paradigm were being overlooked or misinterpreted because they had prematurely been misclassified as impossible and non-existent, or as having roots in primal pain. Indeed, having believed Janov's paradigm for years, and for the great bulk of the primal work I would do, and having complied with Janov's dictum in my own primal work and that of others who I had facilitated, by tracing any seemingly transpersonal experiences to primal pain, and having cleared it out there, I had a special perspective on this point. Heading, Primal Process as Spiritual Process. While I would agree with Janov as well as Fodor, who earlier had made the case for paranormal phenomena having psychological roots, that the majority of what are thought to be religious, spiritual, occult, or transpersonal experiences are indeed mere products of psychological events, especially those that are traumatic, still I was one of those who were enabled in going beyond Janov's paradigm into actual transpersonal states and experiences by the work and the new paradigm I had asserted in my article. So, since I had, and after I had, carried Janov's contention to their limits, and had actual spiritual experiences beyond the ones rooted in primal pain, and had experienced healing and growth as a result of these transpersonal experiences beyond what Janov knew was possible for his therapy, you can see that I was unusually qualified to assert this correction of Janov's paradigm, which gave validation to some forms of spiritual experience, though by no means all. Heading: Michael Adzema, The Second Half of the Cure, Pain, Joy, and Spiritual Grids, Unconditional Acceptance and the Primal Process. Subheading: The Second Half of the Cure, Pain and Joy Grids. This research and understanding led directly into my understanding of the, quote, second half of the cure, and to my subsequent postulations of pain grids, joy grids, and spiritual grids as being three fundamental matrices of human personality and behavior which are accessible through deep, primal, and experiential work. Along with these, I proposed an addendum to the primal therapy as advanced by Janov, which involved only the experiencing of painful events from one's past, parentheses, the pain grids, that included discovering and re-experiencing aspects of one's life that were blissful and happy and workable, the joy grids, and which could be brought forward as workable alternative to the client's previous self-destructive and maladaptive strategies emanating out of the pain grids. Janov would not know of these, for his paradigm did not include the possibility of these experiences, and it did not allow for the deep experiences required or the time needed to access them. For one thing, to access these kinds of experiences, one typically had to continue the primal process past the integration of childhood and birth traumas and to begin opening up to experiences that occurred before one's birth and to the relatively contented state of early womb experience, to euphoric blastocyst re-experience, even further back, and sometimes even to events and experiences before sperm experience, sometimes to egg, ovum experiences going all the way back to when one was a cell within the ovarian sac within one's mother to access this. Heading: Spiritual grids. Beyond these joy grids, I postulated spiritual grids, which were spiritual and philosophical ways of living and perceiving reality and looking at the world, which were beyond the joy grids in both quality of beneficence and scope and in their access. What I discovered was that living the joy grids led to earlier primal experiences at the cellular level, specifically sperm, egg, zygote, and blastocyst, that had characteristically spiritual components, and that this coincided with life experience which brought these spiritual perspectives into practice and use and expanded and deepened them. Heading: Unconditional Acceptance and the Primal Process. As for how one accessed these deeper levels of the primal process, I found and proposed that a radical unconditional acceptance beyond even that advanced by Janov, and more along the lines of what was proposed by his head of training at one time, Jules Roth, and his wife Helen Roth, and their followers and trainers at the Certified Primal Therapist Center in Denver, Colorado, where I experienced the bulk of my primal work and training, was what was required and what enabled access to them. New heading: Michael Adzema, Devolutional Model of Development, parentheses, falls from grace, Processes of Forgetting and Remembering, parentheses, as Individuation and Liberation. Subheading: Falls from Grace and the Devolution and Revolution of Consciousness. Following upon these discoveries, I realized that there were definite stages in the buildup of these grids, and they corresponded to significant events in one's life. The events are conception, birth, the primal scene, and the identity stage of life. Without being aware of the theories of Mott, Shoham, or Wasdell, and based only on personal experiences of deep primal states and observing and facilitating others in these states, along with relevant life experiences of myself and others and pertinent salient research, I realized that life was a process of reduction of awareness from an original, omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent state. A divinity, a divine state, a godhead, a source, which sets up the process of ego construction and human experience. But that this process of forgetting, as I called it, was essentially a neurotic one. It was essentially maladaptive and self-destructive and created an unreal self, using Janov's term, which was inauthentic and which ultimately desired its own revolution or destruction in a spiritual process of remembering, which inevitably, whether in one lifetime or many, brought that about. As I put it, the end result of the neurotic process of diminishment of consciousness through the four falls from grace, which created the ego and was responsible for the much talked about, quote, ego strength proposed by ego psychologists. The end result of all of this was an insensitive sort the kitty drowners and butterfly mashers of the world. I feel pretty sure I do not need to define those personalities for you. Heading, processes of forgetting and remembering, parentheses, as individuation and liberation. Thus, the purpose of life was to experience what one would as ego, as seemingly imperfect, muddled, and often out seemingly wrong as that necessarily would be, in order to, by pain and unhappiness, be prodded into a path of return, spiritual return, primal spiritual return, back to divinity, wholeness, and grace. You're born, you become less, you create an ego separate from the all, you have experiences. These experiences enrich you, though they seem to be mistakes at the time. You seek your own destruction through them as well, so that in this lifetime or many, you return to the all. Next heading, Michael Adzema, Social, Environmental, and Cultural Consequences of Prenatal and Perinatal Events, parentheses, Apocalypse and Humanicide, and parens, an activist imperative of prenatal perinatal insight, innate divinity, processes of forgetting and remembering as individuation and liberation. Subheading, experiences divinity, matter as metaphor. Subsequent to these discoveries and their eventual postulation as theories, frameworks for understanding and paradigms, can be further elaboration that involve the description of reality as essentially experience, with matter being metaphor for true existence, which was coincident with the findings of quantum physics and idealistic and panentheistic perspectives of all times. This I did in Experiences Divinity, Matter as Metaphor. Heading, Innate Divinity, Funny God. I also put forth an understanding of spiritual or metaphysical reality and the corresponding life program and goals that came from it in Funny God, the Tao of Funny God, and the Mind's True Liberation. Heading, Planet Mates, the Great Reveal. And in Planet Mates, the Great Reveal, I brought perinatal understandings of the origins of human consciousness, human separation from nature, and human neurosis as being a result of a fetal malnutrition, which was the result of the bipedalism we uniquely experienced in our evolution, to bear upon our current environmental crisis. And I used the voices of our planet mates, those beings comprising the non-human life on this planet, to make the case. Heading, Apocalypse No and the Emerging Perinatal Unconscious. In another work addressing our environmental crisis directly, titled Apocalypse No, Apocalypse or Earth Rebirth and the Emerging Perinatal Unconscious, I brought perinatal psychology to bear on current times. I discovered and then detailed how our times were unique in the degree of perinatal unconscious material that was coming up in people and being expressed and acted out in modern/postmodern societies. I was able to lay out how that was the case, why that might be the case, and both the dire threat and rare opportunity this phenomenon represented for both a leap in human consciousness or the extinction of the human race. In fact, this work, Wounded Deer and Centaurs, takes up from where Apocalypse No left off, taking the investigations deeper and further and showing a broader scope for their applicability. Heading, Michael Adzema, Human Birth as an Evolutionary Event and as the Critical Event in Human Separation from Nature, Social, Environmental, and Cultural Consequences of Birth Trauma and Human Evolution, Apocalypse and Humanicide as Consequences of Human Birth. Planet Mates the Great Reveal. In this book, Planet Mates the Great Reveal, I relate the process of evolution from our pre-primate forebears through prehistory to civilization and then to current days, through the lens of perinatal trauma and the current apocalypse. Using the voices of our planet mates, I detail how we began from a state of nature, but then as a result of an aquatic ape phenomenon, see Elaine Morgan, aquatic ape, we gained an evolutionary advantage by becoming bipedal while foraging in water, which eventually and gradually led to being bipedal on land. I describe how this resulted in pelvic bone changes, widely varying terms of gestation, secondary altriciality, which is that half of the brain's growth is accomplished outside of the womb, as compared to other species for whom that development occurs in utero, and a birth trauma that is unparalleled in nature. I showed how this birth trauma has led to humans being the crazed and overly intellectual species, capable of incredible achievements of creation of civilization, as well as destruction of life and self. Along the line, I accounted for many of our common understandings which differ from the world of nature and the rest of our planet mates, of work, play, life, death, faith, trust, truth, religion, emotion, feeling, sexuality, and so on, as being an outgrowth of this primary trauma. I showed how what we call our, quotes, human nature is almost invariably traits that are rooted in our birth trauma, and that it is not our primary human nature which is rooted in our pre-birth templates. The Return to Grace series, this is the next heading, the Return to Grace series. In this Return to Grace series of 10 books, of which this is one, I show where we are, how we got to where we are, why we are here, why we need to change from being here, and where to go from here, and how to do that. Book 1, Culture War, Class War, Occupied Generations, and the Rise and Fall of Obvious Truths, describes where we are politically as a result of recent history. We are in a dire state, politically and environmentally, because a natural evolutionary development of consciousness and generational succession, begun in the 60s, was derailed by moneyed interests with a profit motive. Because of this advance being monkey-wrenched by selfish interests, we are in a quandary in all areas of public and environmental life. Book 2, tentatively titled, You Say You Want a Revolution, or The Monster is the Corporation, is not yet in print, but exists online as chapters 17 through 30 of Culture War, Class War at the site of the same name. It elaborates on the dire quality of our times, requiring drastic measures at all levels and in all areas. A new paradigm of economics, politics, individual life purpose, human achievement, and relation to nature. This environmental quandary is introduced in all severity and urgency in Book 3, Apocalypse Emergency Love's Wake-Up Call. This book is both an appeal to our highest beingness and a call to action, wrapped in a psychological and spiritual look at why we are not alarmed at the moment, though we should be. Book 4, Apocalypse or Earth Rebirth and Emergent Perinatal Unconscious, details an alarming and yet possibly opportune development of our times, as existing alongside our current environmental and socio-political dilemmas. It shows how, through means apparently generational and psychological, as well as environmental, we are seeing a rise of perinatal material in the consciousness, motives, and personalities of ourselves and everyone around, including and significantly those in power in these times. I show how we both manifest and act out our perinatal pain in our physical environment, but also in our social environment at all levels, from individual to international. I show where we can place the lever of human effort and activism in order to bring about the change we need in order to survive. It is revealed within our perinatal patterns. In this book, Book 5, Wounded Deer and Centaurs, Necessary Hero in the Prenatal Matrix of Human Events, I carry those themes forward, focusing on 2 factors in particular. The deepest roots of those perinatal apocalyptic upsurges occurring in modern life, parentheses, and I trace them to actual late gestation prenatal events of even more significance than the birth elements, end parens, and the phenomenon of the self-sacrificing individual required to take us forward from these times. This necessary hero, it turns out, is not only apparently coming to our aid and is manifesting in greater numbers, but is imbued with just the kind of access to their own pre- and perinatal material as to make possible their leading us beyond these ties, these prenatal traps, keeping us in bigotry, violence, greed, and fear, and away from our deeper nature of love and compassion, which have been holding down humanity from real progress for thousands of years. In Book 6, Planet Mates, The Great Reveal, as I have said, I have both a plea from our planet mates for us to wake up, a vision of who we are in nature and in relation to them that shows how and why we have strayed and how it has to do with perinatal factors, a revolutionary view on civilization and evolution that puts us in a new and non-complementary light, but also reveals places for change and renewal never before seen. A new paradigm understanding of a way of being in the world and in nature that is more natural, primal, and in touch with our basic nature. And a prophecy that in humans taking up the challenge presented, quote, something wonderful is going to happen, end quote. Book 7, Funny God, the Tao of Funny God and the Mind's True Liberation, describes a new paradigm of activism required for the necessary hero as the Tao of Funny God, which has it that only true and radical responses not rooted in the paradigms we confront can be effective. It details old paradigm patriarchal perspectives and how they are wrong and why they need to be gone beyond. And it explains matriarchal, new paradigm ones that are needed. In its second part, it lays out a prophecy and a vision of a potential wondrous time, wondrous future, coming soon, something along the lines of that, quote, something wonderful of planet myths. This vision is consistent with the findings about nature, reality, and psychology, which I advance in other parts of the series. And in its final part, The Mind's True Liberation, Funny God presents an expansive, indeed towering, overstanding of human life and its purpose in a divine scheme, along with a kind of meditation on the nature of God, human life, life purpose, and on existence itself. Book 8, Experiences Divinity Matter as Metaphor, as described above, explains the nature of reality and human consciousness that is consistent with the views of quantum physics and modern conscious research, especially that of the kind I have experienced in deep experiential psychotherapy, and especially in non-ordinary states of consciousness brought about spontaneously and via primal meditation and breathwork experiences of many years. In Book 9, Falls from Grace, the Devolution and Revolution of Consciousness, I bring to light the devolutional model of consciousness I indicated in several places above. It tells how we got to where we are in each of our individual lives and where we need to address our attention to return to the state of grace, which is our birthright, indeed is our true identity. And in Book 10, Prodigal Human, the Descent of Man, I bring together the ideas of Falls from Grace and Planet Mates in describing the evolutionary / devolutionary arcs of humanity and the individual, founded upon cutting-edge views from our current sciences. Beyond that, I outline our possible return, that something wonderful, and show why it is necessary as well as how it is truly possible, as seemingly impossible as the notion might seem at the outset. At this time, there is also a plan tentatively for the much updated and revised version of the book that I wrote, uploaded to the internet and self-published in 1995, titled Primal Renaissance, The Emerging Millennial Return. Conceivably, it will be a Book 11 of the Return to Grace series, and will be retitled Primal Renaissance, Return to the Garden. It will detail the specific ways we might change our current trajectory, and it will paint a compelling, a comprehensive vision of a possible society, a possible humanity, a possible earth, a possible future, congruent with and enlightened by the prenatal and perinatal understandings that have heretofore been overlooked in previous attempts to present a workable model for humanity. See, for example, the workers' utopia proposed by Marx, which was merely an addendum to the unnatural plight of civilized man, beholden to the hierarchy, but himself a dominator of women, indigenous cultures, and planet mates, and utilizing still those as resources to fuel selfish gains and advantages. Next heading, Michael Adzema, Cellular Consciousness, Cells with a View, Womb with a View, Mythology and Metaphysics with Roots in Cellular and Womb Experience. Subheading, Womb with a View and Cells with a View. And eventually, what is coming, though I have been sharing these ideas widely for decades in both professional and non-professional circles, is an understanding of the bases of our understandings of reality as formed by our experiences in the womb and as cells, which points to a provocative inquiry into the nature of reality beyond the confines of physical life, beyond the templates laid down in us of early prenatal human experience. In Womb with a View, I will describe how our basic mythologies, theologies, and beliefs are laid down in us through our womb experiences. In Cells with a View, I will detail how our basic metaphysical assumptions about reality, especially in its physical aspect, for example, duality, space and time, being and becoming, and so on, are imprinted upon us through our cellular experiences in coming into the world. Next heading, Michael Adzema, Social, Environmental, and Cultural Consequences of Prenatal and Perinatal Events, parentheses, Apocalypse and Humanicide, Activist Imperative of Perinatal Insight, subheading, Wounded Deer and Centaurs. And finally, in this book, I focus specifically on two areas, the roots of evil and the late prenatal experiences of humans and the resulting impending apocalypse. I focus on these prenatal influences, especially the imprint of the time just before birth, in the late stages of pregnancy and before the onset of birth events, on consciousness, society, historical events, and the evil and atrocities of humans, and on a deeper and more positive human nature. Along this, I stress the requirement emanating from this conjunction of impending apocalypse and the discovery of a more positive, more cooperative, wiser, and more environmentally protective human nature, that people rediscover that more primal human nature, akin to the real self of Janov and the true self of Winnicott, the one emanating from our joy grids and spiritual grids. For, as I'm pointing out, if we do not regain our truer and underlying humanity, and instead, coming as we normally do, and acting out of our pain grids, we are not going to have a human experience or even an earthly life experience to be detailing and exploring in the future, let alone people to hear about them. And that's it for the overview of my work. It continues with that for the rest of the paragraph, a few more paragraphs with the importance of the interuterine for understanding our times and the goal of this book. Ending with the sentence, for I am convinced these pre and perinatal things are the forces that are strongest in shaping our present time and its times and its events, creating an ever more discernible perinatal zeitgeist for postmodern times.
Wow.
Wow. It's an overview and incorporating all of the... No, because what you're putting forth is so amazing, vast in scope, and it's going to be like a whole new paradigm you've put forth, understandably, and so well, I think it succeeds in providing that overview.
Good. The reason I wanted you guys to hear it is because this is the first time I wrote down what I'm doing. I've never put it in one place. I've been telling everybody bits and pieces of what I'm doing. And I don't tell anybody everything because nobody will sit there that long to hear everything. Nobody would sit. But
I'm sad.
Yeah. You would be different. Mary Lynn would be different. But I just never put it all together in a narrative. And this time I did.
Brand new overview of humanity's fate, if you will. And how can that not stir people to go on and on and on? I want to hear what his solutions are,
Yeah, I hope so.
And to put it so simply, on something that's been overlooked all these years.
Mm-hmm.
It's all wrapped up in our birthing,
Yeah.
our prenatal,
Mm-hmm. The missing element.
Yes.
Right.
Perinatal experience.
Right.
That chapter, that's part 3 of the overview.
Mm-hmm.
The first part of the overview is called We Ain't Born Typical. It's about birth. And it includes the theorists, early theorists who dealt mostly with birth, including Freud and Rank and people like that. So it's mostly early ones. And then there's 2 more chapters, and I got the next chapter that goes after what I just read is We Are a Fever. The perinatal unconscious driving our humanicide. The kill is saying, we ain't born typical, and we are a fever. And it's like, that is so profound. We ain't born typical, compared to all of the species, and we are a fever. Those are 2 of the main points I'm making in all my books.
We're more like a virus.
Yeah, exactly.
Bacteria.
Exactly. We are a fever. We are, exactly, on the face of the earth, right?
Yeah.
I had something else I want to say to you. I was thinking about this all this time. I've been in this in-between state about how many books I'm going to have in the Return to Grace series, because it was always supposed to be books 10, even number, book 10. And I could see the 10 books, right? The last one bringing out the solutions and all that. But then I started to see that the last book wasn't so much going to bring up the solutions, it was going to provide more of an overview from a scientific perspective of what I said in Planet Mates, and bring it all together with Falls from Grace and show how we are the prodigal humans. And the descent of man is truly a descent. They say descent of man meaning an evolution. That's the way it was meant by Darwin. He wrote The Descent of Man. Well, this is truly a descent from planet-made consciousness. So it's ironic. So this is going to be describing the descent. And now we're prodigal humans. But I keep thinking that there's going to be another one. which would be primal renaissance, return to the garden.
Mm.
And that, you could see, would have the solutions and the vision. Return to the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Primal renaissance, bringing together all these things from indigenous cultures. So it provides the great expanse, how we could have a socialist kind of primal kind of primitive slash. I put it all together. The political theorists and the psychological theorists, and based upon a psychology that we know works, not one that we assume works or doesn't include any psychology, just assumptions based upon an inaccurate view of human nature.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to go back to and to pull from indigenous cultures because they've worked for thousands of years.
That's true.
The Romans are gone. Americans will be gone. All of the Western world, they've risen and fallen.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Because they've gotten rid of our roots, our true roots, all over political reasons, greed, and to keep servants.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in an indigenous culture, everybody serves everybody.
It's egalitarian.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there's any hierarchy, it's minimal.
Yeah.
In primitive societies, primal societies is a better word, basically whoever has the power or is higher up, who has the higher status is somebody, it varies in terms of the skill. Somebody is good at this, and so they have a higher status in relationship to that. Somebody else is good at this other thing, they have a higher status in relationship to that. Somebody's a better healer, so they are more of an authority in that area. Somebody is a better archer or something, they're more of an authority in that area, or a hunter or whatever. Or gardener, farmer, or gatherer, whatever. So it varies depending upon the skill.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Which is the way it should be. This is Return to Grace, is the series, and it's topped off by a book 11. I think that's what it's going to be. Hopefully there'll be a book 11. It's going to be the one everybody's going to be wanting to read. What are the answers? It's like, I figure if I'm laying out the problem pretty closely, it's like the answers are right there with the problems. If we have a separation from nature and that's a problem, and we're too controlling of nature and that's a problem, then the solution seems to be don't be so separate from nature, don't be so fucking controlling. So there's already solutions all the way through everything I'm saying. And if it's bad pre and perinatal bonding with with the unborn and our bad births and all that, and they're creating horrible people that are ruining the world, well then the trick is to have better births and have prenatal bonding and love your kids. So there's obvious ones, but then people want something more, and I just might be able to give it to them, because after I've gone through all that I've gone through, I might be able to come up with a vision of how everything would work together. All those little solutions I'm talking about, how do you put them all together? Because I'm talking about in book 1 with political problems, economic problems, the problem of injustice in society, the problems of the haves and the have-nots, the 1/100th of 1% controlling the 99 and 99 hundredths of the rest of the population on the globe. What do we do about all that? Like Marx attempted something with the Communist Manifesto, with this idea of radical socialism, but it didn't work because it wasn't built on the psychology, a true psychology of humans. It was built upon one that was an outgrowth of the capitalist view of man, of an economic man, a person who just wanted things. And so his view was, have more things and more control of things, you're a better person. But that's not what really builds happiness. That's not what makes us happy. And it led to a hierarchy again, because then men would still be striving, and so they would be kings in their homes. And so we have socialist countries where they're still dominating not their children, their women, their wives. They're still dominating. It still exists. And in the course of the revolution, it was a lot of that. And then, of course, there's exploitation of the environment. Look what's going on in Russia. They're one of the most polluted places in the world. China as well, because they're built on an economic view of humans. there's no spiritual or connection to nature. There's no fucking connection to nature. So like they're built on paradigms that are not workable in terms of being on the earth, workable in terms of being in nature, workable in terms of being inside reality. So I've got to do it. I couldn't possibly do it because I know the good parts of those things, socialism and so on. I know the problems, the spiritual, philosophical problems, the psychological ones. And I know the key that nobody ever looks at, the center, the fucking center of the goddamn atom that nobody looks at, from which all the forces emanate. You can build anything you want around this fucking black hole, but it's going to get destroyed because you're not looking at this fucking source of evil where Satan dwells, so to speak. It's the pre and perinatal. It's the source of all of the evil. It's the Pandora's box. And everybody, you can build all the civilization you want, but if you don't address Pandora's box, it'll open at any time and bring it all crashing down. So that's why I might be able to do something better.
Yes.
You really have put a lot of time and into your primaling and going beyond. So, I mean, to hear all of it put together is really pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is.
It really
It's
is.
very impressive.
Certainly I'm doing that in this book.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it has to be said once. I never really put all of it out there, just parts of it. And I never put all of my work out there. That's not even all my work. It doesn't talk about 4 stages of self-understanding, which is like a whole bunch of books. It doesn't talk about my novels.
Well, I'm glad you're finally beginning to get it out.
Yeah. It's good. It's good for me to lay it out there like that because it puts it in concrete, puts it more, firms it up more that this is what I'm doing. Because obviously the more I do that, the more it gets done. I mean, I created these Return to Grace series, and it's got a force of its own now. Return to Grace series was something that came up several years ago, before the first books were published. It was all there, but it came to me all of a sudden. I had these books and everything, but then I saw how they were all together, and they went from one to the other. And once I had that idea, then they have to get done. I mean, if there was a spot for one book and I didn't have anything to write about it, I'd have to fucking write something about that thing. If there was some spot that was missing, because it's so compelling, the overall idea. You go from the political, where everybody is. Everybody's got a place in society, and you take them a little bit further than that, and you look at they're oppressed politically, okay, and then you look at the environment and what we're doing in the environment and how we're screwing up the environment and how there's a danger there as well. And then we keep going till the final books present a vision of how to solve it all. Using the ideas presented in the middle books that brings out the pre and perinatal everywhere.
Thank you for allowing me to be the process, part of the process.
Sure.
Really.